Working. Good evening, fellows, members and guests. Can you hear me at the back? Thank you. I can hear you. The first announcement I must make is that, unfortunately, our President, Patrick Marcellis, has had to go home very quickly this morning because he had the news that his daughter had been admitted to hospital, and that is why I'm standing here in his place. We do, of course, send our very best wishes to Patrick and his daughter, and I will be communicating with him after this meeting. First of all, then, the fire notice and the numbers in attendance. Mr. Honorary Secretary.
Feels very strange doing this for the last time in this building, for sure. No fire tests planned for today, thankfully, but if the alarm does go off, can you go out the door at the back or to the door just here? Down the stairs, out the front door, turn right and turn right again into the alleyway, and then we will count you off. I'm very pleased to announce that today we have 103 fellows and members and 9 guests. We have 7 overseas members, 2 from Norway. Of course, we've got Georg Størmer, our speaker, Ivar Sundsbo from Norway, Ulia Marias from Croatia, Bart Willikens and Patrick Marsalis from Belgium, from Egypt, Sheriff Samra, and from New Zealand, Robin Gwynn. Only one person has actually put down that this is their first visit, and that's Ivar Sundsbo. Okay, so welcome very much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Georg Størmer with his display Norway 1855 to 1868. Those of you who had the opportunity to view the material in the frames will realize what a breathtaking display of material this is, and we're now going to hear a description of it by Georg.
Dear members and what you are called fellows, and yes, you know, this is very important that you say it the right way. It's such a great pleasure to come here, and I am so thankful that Patrick has invited me here tonight to speak about old Norwegian stamps. It has really been a long time since there has been somebody speaking about Norwegian stamps. So I am going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. This handout which you received at the door, that was really a general background handout. It's not identical to what I'm going to say. The presentation in the frames is also it's sort of a general presentation, and you will not find exactly the same things, because partly because I've written it on different points in time. The other is that I've sort of, from very broad presentation in the frames, tried to make it more narrow in the handout, but more background information. Whereas this, what I'm doing now, is going to be, would you say, more focused, and I'm trying to focus it on the most interesting things as far as I see it, and also, of course, on political background and things that have not been recorded in the handout. In the last 100 years, there has been 2 presentations of first Norwegian stamp issues. First was in 1935 when the quite famous royal member Goodfellow, he talked about the plating of the first Norwegian stamp and the Oscar issues. In 1930s, everybody was very concerned about plating. It's probably the same thing in the United Kingdom. I think that has sort of gradually been less popular, partly because people don't have the eyes to study little details anymore, particularly in our high age. The second was by Mr. Snarvoll in 1995, where he talked about his book, Norwegian Letters to Foreign Destinations. He didn't talk about the stamps, but letters to foreign destinations. I'm sorry about my voice. hay fever. It's not that I had the pint, which I did have, but this is hay fever. The first issue, imperforated, was sold out in only 2 years. Then Norwegian government, or the postal office, but it was paid by the Norwegian government, decided to have a much nicer issue made in Sweden, which we call the Oscar issue. And then after a lot of complaints about the high costs of this second issue, they made one in lithography in 1863. But I revert to all these questions, but these are sort of the three issues that we are going to talk about tonight. For those of you who don't know where Norway is, it's sort of close to the North Sea. It's close to Scotland, you see. And on the east, you have a little border with Russia today, with Finland, and then with Sweden. Denmark, which was in union with Norway for 400 years, is a bit to the south. This union with Denmark, after the Napoleonic Wars, the Russians and the British decided that they wanted to award Mr. Charles John, famous general of Napoleon, who switched sides helping Britain and Russia defeat Napoleon. And they wanted to do something nice to him, and the nicest thing that he could think of was that Norway was transferred from Denmark to Sweden. This seems a neat way of solving things. Then, why and how did they issue this stamp? Of course, in general, in Europe, they introduced standardized postage rates. In Britain, you had the 1 penny black, and in other countries, similar solutions. So in Norway, they decided to issue this stamp, which was going to pay for a single letter, as they call it, to all Norwegian destinations. 4 skilling is equivalent to 1.8 pence in those days. And in Norway, that was considered quite expensive. People, individuals, didn't write that much. And we see that quite few letters exist from the first month of 1855. That is exactly the same thing as you see from Sweden and Finland, where we had in the Royal recently presentations that people have difficulty finding letters from the first few weeks after it was issued. It was sold out in N56 after 2 years. So this first Norwegian stamp is very common in used condition. As a matter of fact, there's probably tens of thousands of them still today, and in the 1930s, when everybody was plating, they sort of disappeared from the market for a while, but today it's ample supplies. But the mint copies have been extremely rare, and the reason for that is that it was pretty expensive to buy in those days, and there was little postage. That was, when people had an extra stamp, they certainly didn't save it, they used it. So that this is really the only multiple of good condition that exists today, and it comes from the Ferrari auction. I have not been in contact with the Tapling collection, and I shall do that when I get back, write a letter to them to see if Mr. Tapling also had multiples of this stamp, but I haven't heard about it yet, but we'll take contact. It was printed by very simple, sort of what you call, well, what they use for newspapers, with lead for each stamp was then casted, very simple way. So it was a lot of small errors, as you can see there to the right. And it was in the 1930s great hobby to place them in the 200 stamp sheet. So here you find, for instance, Doublefoot has been quite well known for 100 years or something, and that was put there in the border of the sheet. In the post offices, gradually they discovered that the best way of handling sheets was to cut them into horizontal strips of 10 and then cut that up. And as a result, in the beginning, you had some blocks of 4 in the 1855 in the beginning. You still find that, but gradually there was very, very few blocks of 4 because they all used strips. This is a letter with typical strip to Hamburg. I have counted how many letters with stamps that are found which exist today. And as you see, there is 93 covers recorded, half of them to Sweden, and then Germany, particularly to Hamburg, and then Russia and Italy. Reason why Britain isn't included is that postage had to be multiple of 4 skilling, and there was no way you could pay postage to the UK as a multiple of 4 skilling. This is to Germany, a lady who I have written an article about it, but I found out that she had been playing piano, studying piano in Leipzig. And you see this is a 6 stamp cover, very typical cover to the German, the German area, I would say. To Russia, there is very few covers recorded, and this is the largest of any blocks recorded to anywhere, the 32 skilling. And it is unfortunately a bit repaired, but it's still very, very interesting cover to Russia with 32 skilling postage. The gentleman, I say a man of the world, I noticed that also in Mr. Douglas's presentation of Finland, there were letters to Mr. Starkey. He was a Swede who had a tremendous charm, it is written about it, and he managed to get influence in the royal circus in St. Petersburg, and he was a merchant and he made a lot of money, and so these 6 existing letters to St. Petersburg are all to Mr. Starkey. So I call him a man of the world. This is another interesting area. This, as I said, there are 3 main areas of number 1 covers, and one is to Germany, the other is to Russia, and the third is to Naples. Russia and Naples we only know 6 covers to each, and all the covers to Naples is to a firm called Maingay Robin. And I started to try to find out what on earth that was. And this firm was based in Jersey in the United Kingdom. And they had a fleet of sailing ships serving the St. Lawrence area for fishing, cod fishing in Canada. And they had sales offices, to use today's terms, in Naples and in Brazil. So it was what I would call an early multinational company. And in the end, they went under together with a lot of Norwegian firms in the 1880s because of the steamships taking over from sailing ships. So this company went bankrupt. The other interesting thing is that it is the only strip with the so-called double foot, which you see up there. This is a little error which has been collected for at least 100 years, has been in catalogs for a long time, but no, this is the only strip. And the reason for that, I believe, is that the collectors in those days, they didn't collect strips, they cut it off. So they are all being cut off from strips. No, back. So, this first Norwegian stamp, which I was describing, had a lot of small errors. It had been criticized because it was too simple. People didn't feel it was very nice. So in the end, the postal office decided that they should make new stamps. And the Crimean War was really a key here because Norwegian government and Norwegian shipping made a lot of money. As you may have read, that the British transported French 200,000 soldiers to Crimea, and I think they sent 100,000 of their own. Enormous need for shipping. And that meant that Norwegian government felt very rich due to tax income. So they decided to make this stamp here. It was made in Stockholm from the same technical solution as you find in the early French issues from 1849, and also the British so-called surface printed. And it was made by electrolysis. And they used something called decoupage, which was tiny pieces of paper which was made under the printing sheet to make sure that all details were clear. And you see, if you compare it to Norwegian coin, this is sort of a dollar type coin. You see how that was primitive compared to this, which has very delicate printing. So this is high class stamp, which was produced and issued in late 1856. I have shown it in blocks, and again they are quite rare, and particularly the 8 skilling, because it was so expensive, so people didn't keep them. And 1857 is before the big stamp collector boom, which started in the mid-60s. This is an area which has been famous for a long time. It's imperforated of the second printing of the 4 skilling. And this was in the Ferrari collection, and it was subsequently bought by Mr. Odfjell, who was a royal member and sold this collection in 1929. So this has a very long history. And they are really from 3 different places at 3 different dates. So people speculate if there has been 200 issued, so 300, or people don't know. The 2 skilling yellow was issued in February 57 because they wanted stamps for local use in Oslo, Christiania in those days. But it was also found out that in order to meet different postage rates, you couldn't only have 4 skilling or 8 skilling, so that was used on foreign mail as well. Then, for instance, to the United Kingdom, it cost 35 skilling to send a letter. And that meant that you also needed a 3 skilling to make up for a figure like 35 skilling. And then, in order to select the gray color which was done, they made color proofs. And this is the only color proofs that exist in all Norwegian stamps, and it was found after this printer, after he died in the 1880s. If you look at foreign mail, probably a couple of 100,000 letters were sent from Norway outside, beyond Hamburg, as I say, so it's not covering Denmark or Sweden in this period, a couple of 100,000. And out of that, 290 are still kept. This relationship, 1 to 1,000, we find also in presentations of Mr. Douglas from Sweden. So this is not unusual. So you can't really use statistical conclusions here because it's such a small sample. But you see here that suddenly it started to go up. And the reason for that is that they had these 2 and 3 skilling issues, so they could use stamps on letters to important places like Britain and Denmark, France, etc. Norway had connections abroad for, of course, thousands of years, and very good connections to Denmark and Hamburg due to this long joint kingdom with Denmark. But with Sweden, very poor connections. So the first time there was a railroad to Sweden was in 1865. And the bordering area to Sweden were very lowly populated and very bad roads. The reason for that is that Denmark, Norway and Sweden had wars for hundreds of years, and there was really not any wish to have easy road connections to Sweden. So what we see is that most letters are sent to Hamburg, if you talk about foreign mail, not over Sweden. This it was, of course, used on the first Norwegian stamp, this grid cancel, but some ships kept these grid cancel even after the first Norwegian stamp stopped using them. And this is the only recorded letter to UK with grid cancellation. This is only recorded to Germany with grid cancellation. The funny thing is that grid cancellation was probably homemade. It may have been damaged and they did something to repair it. And if you study pictures in the handout, you will see that this is a very funny grid cancellation. But this is the only one to Germany with Oscar. Then we have other peculiarities, that partly paid letters. It was possible if you sent letters to Naples. This is the same firm I was talking about, the trading firm. And then you paid only to Danish border, which is out in the sea. I don't see the border, of course. And that was 11 skilling. The rest had to be paid when it was received. This is a letter to Sardinia, to Genoa, and it has been sent over Switzerland. You see, we have Switzerland. So that is quite rare, and that is another way of putting up postage, which was then 39 skilling in this case. This is another very strange route where it was paid to Dutch border, it says. It was paid to Rotterdam, and then it was sent by French mail over Mount Cenis, whatever it is called, to Genoa. Very strange way of sending mail. This Jupiter was a ship that had its own cancellation, Jupiter, and this is also partly paid. It's paid to Hamburg, and the receiver in France had to pay what they call 12 décimes, which is 1.2 francs. Very, very strange, the whole thing. And Jupiter, as I say, was a ship cancellation. This is the oldest known cover to Constantinople. This was sent by French ship, and it has typical French cancellation on the back. This is a letter to America, which I'm just written an article for the Collectors Club in New York, and it will be printed soon, about this letter, which is in a very particular period in New York, and it's sent in 1857. So then, as I say, they were criticized for having spent too much money on stamps. So they decided to do something in Norway, which was lithography. So this is printed in a cheaper way. So it was several issues here, several stamps. The first 24 skilling, the postal office thought that that would have an enormous demand, because letters up to that point had been full of stamps. You know, if you paid something in the United States, 83 skilling, it needed 10 stamps. So they decided that they wanted to have a 24 skilling. The problem was that this was rapidly sold out. No, this was not rapidly sold out, because the postal rates in Europe were falling all the time. So that So when they put it in 1863, they thought it would be long living. And this is a letter to Constantinople with these two issues from the Oscar issue. And I'll show you something about how that worked, because it's a bit difficult to explain. But I'll say the first Oscar was sold out very soon in 1863. Whereas the three skilling was never sold out. It lasted for 10 years because the low demand. On top, that is 24 skilling, which people thought would last a long time, a short time, I mean. But then they had to come to the conclusion that it was never going to be sold out, so they burned 600,000 of it in 1890s. This is the oldest cover of the 8th skilling from October 1863 to St. Petersburg. Very few covers exist to London, and that is of course strange to you, but the reason is I think Britain was very focused on empire business, and even banking. The Norwegian covers did not go to London for banking. They went to Amsterdam, where there is a lot of covers to Amsterdam, which I'll show you one or two. So this is very strange. But then after the Crimean War, I think Britain opened up. You had the so-called Navigation Act that from 1849 was disbanded, and gradually I think Britain did more and more business with Norway, and you see that ended up being the biggest destination for post was Britain, but it took a long time to happen. This is from the war between Germany and between Denmark and all the German states in 1864. And this is well known to collectors, but it used to be the Danish stamp with KSDOP, which means the Danish post office in Hamburg. And during the war, they simply cut that off. That is from 1864. Letter to Spain. This is written by a Spanish person in Bergen, because in those days, and that goes back to the Hanseatic period, in the Norwegian trading firms, they had Spaniards working and vice versa. So Norwegians worked in Spain. So this is typically written by Spanish handwriting. This is rare letter with 3 of these 24 skilling, which was not often seen. This is to Warsaw. This is the only cover I've seen to Warsaw in this period, which was part of Russia, had the same postage rate, but it's still a separate country, you can say. This is to Spain, and this is a letter to Portugal, where we had a correspondence which was all dealing with sale of port from Portugal to Bergen. So this is a letter which details things about exports of port. As I said, there was connections with Amsterdam, with the bank. This bank, Elstorffus, I am from finance area where I used to work, and I looked into this, and this is part of one of these big Dutch banks today. And it was a powerful financial center. I have also read that the Dutch banks, they borrowed money in London. But it was big and very important connection with Norwegian business. The 3 skilling was only printed in 270,000. They didn't think there was going to be any demand for it, but in the end it was big demand, because they used it 3 skilling on partly paid letters to Rotterdam. You see Zeebrief Rotterdam, and it was similar to France, where they used 5 of them, so they were all sold out in a year. So I think that was probably it. Did I make it? Nearly? Ja. Also,
think the timing was absolutely perfect. May I now call upon Ivar Sundsbo to present the vote of thanks. Thank you. Yes, of course.
Thank you. I've been given the honor of huge thanks to Georg Størmer. Thorough lesson about Norwegian classic philately. And it's been a pleasure to listen. I've seen this collection several times at exhibitions, and I hope he has been happy with the rewards he has been given so far. A few words about the speaker today, and I may give you some private information too, I guess. Not that private. He finished his business administration studies at Harvard in '67 and was the financial director of Norsk Hydro for several years, and has been a vice chairman of the Oslo Stock Exchange. And in philately, he exhibited classic Norwegian philately at Norway's 1980, back at that time, and went around making notes about destinations, note about rates, note about the numbers of covers. So he was the first one to register the amounts of Norwegian classic covers going abroad. He was cooperating with the Norwegian Catalogue Committee for several years, which is the Norwegian Bible in philately, and has been interested in classic philately all his life, I guess, which also results in some exhibits of the Perkin-Bacon years, 91 points, at London in 1915, and Southeast Europe and Levant, 1850 to 78, very difficult area, 90 points in New York. So his deep interests in classic philately must be a pleasure for us all, because he has so many connections, I must say, to what happened historically events inflicting on the male. What is so special is the thoroughness, which has always been there. So just not at the philatelic point of view, but the historical as well. Research concerning the companies, who were the people behind the letters and who were the recipients. Georg Størmer held a speech at the Norwegian Postal History Society a couple of years ago, just focusing on that area. Who were the people behind it? So thank you so much. It was a pleasure on behalf of both the Royal and, not at least, the Norwegian philatelists. I'm very proud of having Georg Størmer here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the presentation of the certificate and the 150th anniversary medal, it's now your opportunity for those of you who may have any questions about the display. No? I think you've silenced them all. It's a great pleasure for you to be here to put this display to us this evening. And firstly, may I present you with the certificate, the 150th anniversary certificate, and secondly, the 150th anniversary medal, which we present instead of the plaquette during the sesquicentennial period.
I'm very, very pleased. Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure. Now we need some photographs. Yes, okay. If you'd like to come round, we can
take out the medal? Or?
No, leave,
No,
I'd
yeah,
leave the medal
yeah.
in the box. But we need to take these off, I think, for the
Yeah. Oh yeah,
badge.
badge, yeah.
Badge off.
So you get my handkerchief.
No, that's fine. No, in focus.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Oh, yes. Nothing. Okay. Thank you very much. You have to have a seat.
Pleasure, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are one or two additional notices. First of all, may I call upon Brian Trotter to tell us about the move from these premises to 15 Abchurch Lane. I think you have some
I have some
news.
bad news and I have some good news. The bad news is our move, I fear, is going to be delayed. We learned that this morning in some meetings. We will continue to move everything out of here next week as planned. Anything that's not going with us, but we will be delayed in our move to the new building. The good news is that it's July and August and we don't have meetings in July and August. So with a bit of luck, we can start in September, the new season, in our new building as planned. But for those of us who are involved in moving it from here to there, it's going to be a busy summer. So that's probably all I could say for now. We have a meeting next week where we will try and understand exactly how long we will be delayed. But it's clearly not going to happen on the date that we had planned, which was the end of June. So with those good news and bad news, we'll see you at the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Brian. Moving on, Peter, I think you have some information about tomorrow's Royal.
Well, it's my job to lighten the load, I think. The good news is that it should be ready before Crossrail is. And if it isn't, Brian... No, have any of you ever had a builder who's been on time? Have you ever had one who's been on budget? Well, he's time and I'm budget. And the only thing I'd like to remind you about today is that the auction is in November, and it would be really nice to have half a dozen of the covers which are around the wall here to auction. Thank you very much. And lots of other things which you've got in your shoe boxes at home, ladies and gentlemen. The retiring chief commoner of the city, who you all know as John Scott, said to me the other day, he said, you know, there are no really fine buildings in the city of London that don't have a name. And 15 Abchurch Lane is a bit of a mouthful. So I thought, well, that's rather a good thing. Let's have a name. What a great idea. Number 41 was okay for here, but number 15 is, well, it's you know only a third, isn't it? So it's no good. So we want a name. So I went home and I told my wife, I said, we're thinking of getting a name for the building. She said, why don't you have a competition? And I thought that was a damn good idea. So we're going to have a competition. And so I want all of you, and this will go out obviously in the LP and in other things. What you have to do is you have to think of a preferably suitable name for our new building and send it by email to name@rpsl.org.uk. It's as simple as that. Now, if your email address does not indicate your name, I think it would be very nice if you would add your name to it, because clearly at the end of the day, we're going to want to thank the person who comes up with the best name. This will be open until the end of June, when we will close the naming opportunity, and we will choose a name, and we'll do it by some process whereby you all have an opportunity to add your vote for it. So that's the new plan, and what's more, it's going to be free. because I thought if I asked for any more money, somebody would start throwing things. Goodbye.
Although Patrick isn't here, it is not quite the chocolate-free zone that you might have expected. So, in addition to receiving the certificate and the medal, there are one or two other little goodies which Patrick generally presents, and there are some things for refreshment of the inner person. Okay,
Which is badly needed.
yes, well it will be, I think. Yes. And Ivar, there's something for you for doing the vote of thanks. So if you'd like to... you may think
I thought there was going to be a book, but it is chocolate.
Oh, it is chocolates. Oh, yes, yes, yes. It may look like a book. That's right. Now, our next meeting is a 5 o'clock meeting on the 23rd of May, and that is the Baghdad Overprints and Events Leading to Their Issue by Freddie Kalaski, who many of you will know Freddie, and I think he's here today. Yeah. We'll see you again in a fortnight. That meeting, however, won't be here, so the meeting's being moved, but the organisation isn't in the background. But the meeting will be held at the South Bank Centre, Belvedere Road, SE1 8XX, which I'm told is only a 4-minute walk from Waterloo Station. I can't really say which direction from Waterloo Station one has to take at this stage, but no doubt there are others here today who can give suitable advice.
Is it at the top of the festival hall? Yes. Which is signposted from Waterloo Station?
Thank you very much, Grace. Yes. If you want to know where it is, do ask Grace afterwards.
Follow Grace.
Follow Grace, yes. Now, the material for this display will be in the frames until 6 o'clock. The next thing, and we were only told about this a couple of moments before we started the display this afternoon, that it's asked that we have a photograph of everybody. You're not expected to go and stand outside as if you're rehearsing the evacuation procedure. But if you could remain, those at the back, if they could stand, and others sort of crouch slightly, or I'm only repeating the advice I was given. I can't comment upon it. Then we will attempt to take a photograph of everybody, as it is the last meeting to be held in this building. So I can see certain people waving, grinning, whatever. No. I think anybody who's on that side who wishes to be included, perhaps if you could move over slightly.